my name is Ashley Cherry, and I'm presenting on sibling incest and trauma. What is sibling incest? Definition: any sexual behaviors that occur between individuals who have one or both parents in common, or sexual behavior that occurs between individuals who consider themselves to be family. Prevalence of sibling incest. Sibling incest in the past has been something that has been oftentimes ignored because people see it as, normal play or development. However, recently there's been more awareness to it as a problem. So up to 35% of all girls experience sexual abuse, with the offender usually being male and frequently being a sibling. It is 5 times more common than parent-child incest, and the offenders usually abuse their victims more frequently and over longer periods of time than parent offenders. 20% of all sexual assaults are committed by minors, and their first victim is often a family member. The impact of sibling incest. It is a significant risk factor for mental health problems, including depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, suicide ideation, and eating disorders. Female victims usually become sexually active at an early age and are often more promiscuous than girls who are not abused. Victims often have difficulties in adulthood in areas such as work, parenting, and interpersonal relationships. Families where sibling incest occurs often have many shared characteristics. Oftentimes, parents are inaccessible. It is common for the father to be deceased or to have left the family. Mothers often have problems with alcoholism, substance abuse, or mental illness. Individuals within these families often have low self-esteem, no impulse control, low tolerance for frustration, and lack of problem-solving skills. There's often a parentified child, and this child is usually offending on the siblings that he or she is supposedly taking care of. These families are often very large, chaotic, and emotionally volatile. They often have sexualized environments with open boundaries. For example, pornography might be accessible to the children. The parents might watch it while the kids are present. They may not take precautions so the children don't see them being sexually active. And it's also not uncommon for there to be marital discord and affairs taking place within the relationship. Okay, now for how I see trauma and the model that I came up with. Primarily, I am a narrative therapist, which means that I believe reality is socially constructed by our families, language, society, and our culture. I feel there are no absolute truths, and everyone has a different reality. Problems arise when individuals are living out a reality which is no longer congruent with the reality they see for themselves. Because I am a narrative therapist and I do hold those beliefs, I found an approach which I felt fit very well with narrative. That approach is the stress and coping approach. According to Holman and Silver, it indicates that stress and coping theory maintains that coping with stressful experiences is a dynamic process involving ongoing change in a person's environment. They go on to say that the way an individual copes with a trauma is based on their cognitive interpretation of the event and other social responses to the event. They discussed how individuals develop schemas about themselves, other people, and the world, and how events will be seen as traumatic to the individual when it does not fit into the pre-existing schema that one has about themselves or others. Also, the degree to which an event is traumatizing varies depending on what type of emotionally meaningful schema is challenged by this event. So my view of trauma, how I see that this fits with narrative therapy, is that I feel that narrative and schemas are very similar. I believe that different things are traumatic to different people, and I feel that the reason for this has to do with the narrative that people have constructed about themselves and the world, and how much the traumatic event matches or does not match the event, the traumatic event that has occurred. I also believe very strongly that trauma is a systemic issue. There was some evidence for this in the stress and coping approach. They indicated that social responses from others influence how the victim interprets the trauma. So again, their interpretation of the trauma is based on how others in the system interpret that situation. Family relationships play a large part in creating children's working models of themselves and others. And I also believe that there are many other problems in the system which can contribute to the development of an environment where trauma could take place. For example, parents not being around, no boundaries, a very sexualized environment. All those things that the system participates in can help facilitate an environment in which a trauma is more likely to occur. In this situation, sibling incest. First order versus second order change. In order for second order change to take place, I believe that the entire family system needs to be involved in treatment. If only the victim or the offending sibling change, are involved in treatment and work towards change, it will only be considered first order change. And the reason I feel this is because once they are back in the larger family environment of their family who has not changed, that change will be challenged and will disappear, meaning that second order change was not achieved. Stages of therapy and interventions. The first stage of therapy that I would begin with in creating this model to treat sibling incest is an assessment phase. During this phase, I would individually meet with each family member. And the reason for this is I feel that it's important to understand each family member's individual schema surrounding the trauma. I also feel that this is a good time to assess for other issues, especially parents' own abuse. Oftentimes, when a child offends, it brings up abuse issues for their parents, and they oftentimes have really negative feelings toward the situation or the child who offended that are oftentimes not healthy to be brought up in family therapy. So this is a good time to assess for those items and get those out before family therapy begins. The next stage of narrative therapy is externalizing the problem. First, I feel that it's very important for the trauma to be externalized from both the offender and the victim, so they can work to fight against it in the future, both in their own way. For example, the offender is going to need to fight against it to make sure that it doesn't happen again, and the victim is going to need to fight against it to make sure it does not take over or control who they are and what their future is. The next stage is deconstruction. During this stage, the therapist needs to work to deconstruct each individual's problematic schemas and to help individuals see that there are other possible solutions and other possible schemas. For the victim, they would begin their own individual therapy, and during that therapy, they would focus on deconstructing their schema. Themes that would be very important to work on deconstructing would be low self-esteem and exploring feelings of self-blame. It's found that oftentimes blame creates a negative self-schema, and if those feelings are explored, they can often alleviate some of those feelings. I also feel that it's important for the victim to take part in group therapy. This can show them other individuals who have experienced the same type of trauma, and they can all share their schemas together. And when other group members experience success, they can see that is possible. So that opens up space within them for a new possible schema involving successes. Another point that I think is important for group therapy is psychoeducation about healthy sexual behaviors. They may not know, they might not have been taught that in their families of origin. They, might think what happened with their sibling is normal. So I feel that the education piece is also very important. So the deconstruction phase for the offending sibling looks a little bit different. They will also participate in individual and group therapy. In individual therapy, they need to learn to take responsibility for their actions, work on impulse control, problem-solving skills, and address low self-esteem. The low self-esteem issue also comes up for the offending sibling. Um, Many people might have negative reactions to what happened and to the trauma, and they may internalize some of those reactions, therefore creating low self-esteem. So it's important that that's addressed with the offending sibling as well. For group therapy, they also learn to take responsibility and they're held accountable by other group members. I feel this is very important because they can see other group members being responsible, and I think that helps them to be held accountable for their actions. And again, psychoeducation, they need to be educated on healthy sexual behaviors as well. There's a caution with this one. In my experience, not all individuals are appropriate for group therapy. Many times, individuals will not take responsibility for the sibling incest or the abuse that occurred, and to put them in a group where the primary goal is to be responsible for behaviors and this person is denying them, it's not healthy or beneficial for the other members to have this person in the group, so it's oftentimes best to hold off if they are denying that the abuse occurred. The next stage is beginning to create a new narrative with unique outcomes and family strengths. This is when family therapy begins. There are some things that I would like to touch on in family therapy before I talk about creating the new narrative. And that is, first of all, safety planning. This should always be addressed at the beginning of therapy, depending on what the living arrangements are for the family with the offending sibling and the other siblings. But safety planning needs to be addressed. It should include things of line of sight supervision, sleeping arrangements, bathroom rules, privacy about getting dressed, things like that. And it's also important to address some of those family boundaries. Since we talked about before how there are many open boundaries, it's important to, set guidelines for families about this. Once that is done, they can begin to weave unique outcomes of times when the family has overcome the trauma, along with their family strengths in order to create a new narrative or schema. And there's also a caution with this one. Family therapy should only happen if the family is supportive and they believe the victim. If they are not supportive or they are denying that the abuse has taken place, this is not a good time to start family therapy, as it will just be unhealthy for the victim. The next stage, reinforcing the new narrative. This can also take place in family therapy. And now that the family has a new healthy narrative, it needs to be reinforced. One thing that I have found helpful for this is a clarification session. The offending sibling apologizes for the abuse, takes full responsibility, and talks about things that they have done to change their offending behaviors. This is really helpful for the victim because it just, reinforces the fact that old schema is over and done with, that this person has changed and they are doing these positive things which they are taking into that new schema that they have created. So that's really enforcing for that victim. And secondly, the parents may also need to write a clarification. The reason for this is they might not have been available to the victim. They might have ignored the abuse. They might not have provided a safe environment. And so it's really reinforcing and assuring for parents to do their own clarification and apologize for some of their behaviors too. And that also ensures that the children, can move forward with their healthy schema. Ultimate goal with treatment. I feel very strongly that this depends on the family. If the family is very cooperative with treatment, meaning they are following safety plans, completing all treatment plan goals, then the goal may actually be to facilitate a healthy development of a shared family schema. However, if the family is not cooperative, they don't participate in therapy, the therapist has serious concerns about safety planning, then moving forward with a shared schema may not be the best thing. At that point, it might be better to go ahead and focus on the individual and to have them create their own individual healthy schema to move forward instead of the family, since they are not being supportive of them. Okay, that brings my presentation to a conclusion. These are the resources that I used. If anyone has any questions, they can feel free to contact me at my email address, which is acherry84 at hotmail.com. Thank you for your time.